Hi, everyone. It's Leanne Bridges here, the work-life transition coach, and I'm here with the Inspire Show, which is our monthly interview series where we interview change leaders from around the world and locally who are help making a difference and using their skills and talents and gifts to really help others to express themselves in their greatest potential. So I'm really excited today that I have my publishing coach here with me, Alexa Nazzaro. And we're going to talk a little bit about the process of self-publishing. As you know, many of you, I just launched my book, Love Will Keep Us Alive, and you can find out more about that on loveWillKeepUsAlive.com. And so I'm going to just give a little bit of a background on Alexa before we get her to tell us her story and some of the ins and outs of self-publishing. So Alexa actually is a published author herself, and she's the founder of Aaxel Author Services, which helps authors across all genres, my French is coming through, publish their books. So I like to just take a little quote from Alexa, which I really like. This is on her website. It says, "In meeting more and more writers, I realized that despite the hundreds of self-publishing experts out there, which I have seen, there are still a need for guidance. Guidance that's grounded in fact and not hype. Guidance that was focused on professionalism and excellence, not on finishing the book in 30 days. Boy, I've heard a lot about that. So we're going to talk about that today. And so just a little bit more about Alexa. She guides you through each step of the process. And she'll tell you a little bit more about that. And she also has given self-publishing workshops for the Quebec Writers Federation and also serves as a peer review of the self-publishing published applications for the Writers Union of Canada. And Aaxel Author Services is also a partner member of the Alliance of Independent Authors. So we're going to talk to Alexa about all of that today. And for any of you want to ask some questions, you put it in the chat, and we'll have some time later on also to ask on camera. So welcome. Thank you so much for coming and joining us today. I'm really excited because you've helped me so much in my process.
Thank you. No, it's wonderful. Thanks for having me on, Leanne.
Okay, you're very welcome. So let's start out, Alexa, by just telling us a little bit about your story and how you got into what Author Services is and how you got into that kind of area of business.
Sure. Author Services, I identify Author Services as shepherding an author through their process of publishing a book, of taking a manuscript and transforming it into a book, much like the one you held up. And some authors come to me and they need everything. So they need the editing, they need the cover design, they need the interior layout. And other authors come to me and say, well, my book's already published, but I need a website, or I need a press kit, or I need some help in setting up a book tour. And so yes, I have the turnkey publishing process, but I can also intervene at whatever step feels right for the author. So it's really about adapting all the services that an author ideally should use to publish their book and adapting and tailoring them to where they happen to be in the process.
Perfect. Great explanation. And we're going to dive into each or quite a few of those different aspects. But first, your story towards the work that you're doing. I know that you're a published author and you struggled a little bit with the whole self-publishing. It was overwhelming for me when you start to Google self-publishing. All of a sudden, the vultures come out.
Absolutely. No, definitely. So I actually studied creative writing. I got my degree in creative writing. I've always been a writer first from the time I was a very young child. And I wrote one of the books that I had actually written in university. I decided to publish that just before my son was born. So the timing was a little questionable, but I went through the process. I really did it myself. I went out, I looked for the suppliers, I read all the blog posts, I looked at all the videos, and I did it myself. I actually found it was such a fun creative process. I really liked harnessing control of the whole process instead of waiting for an agent to take a chance on me or a publishing house. It was really fun to just do it on my own. But then I kind of forgot about it in the sense that I never really thought about using those services in a business. I actually decided to launch a copywriting business, and one of my clients needed help with advertising copy, but at the same time, she told me, I have this ebook. I'd like to actually transform it into a book, but I don't know where to start. And then that's when the light bulb went off, and I said, well, I can help you with that because I've done it myself. And I just started interweaving author services into my regular little spiel whenever I went to networking events, and I just started meeting other writers. And it really kind of grew very organically from there. There was not much of a strategy at the beginning, and it was work that I obviously enjoyed tremendously because I love writers of all types. And I love the creative process of publishing because even though there's a lot of technical stuff related to publishing, it ultimately is very creative because I consider books, if they're well done, they're like mini works of art. So it's fun to be a part of that. And that's really the story, the basic story.
Very cool. And mini works of art is a great way to describe it. And to the author, it's like their baby, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's so fun. Almost every author, when they hold that first copy in their hands, they'll almost always tell me it's almost surreal, to think that in some cases, authors have been working on their book for years, much like you, and so to finally see that come to fruition, it's a really strong sense of accomplishment. And I feel like I've been along on the ride. I've been privileged to be along on the ride. So it's a lot of fun.
Beautiful. That's wonderful. So tell me a little bit about why somebody would, because most people kind of consider, should I self-publish, first, even when they're still writing, they're thinking about it, or they have an idea. So self-publishing versus going to an agent or going straight to a publishing house.
Sure.
Tell us what the landscape's like out there.
Okay, sure, definitely. I mean, when you decide to go the traditional route, what that usually means is getting an agent first. There are few publishing houses that they keep their doors open to unsolicited manuscripts by authors, unless they're small ones. If they are small presses, then it absolutely still is a possibility. But for many authors, if they want to get some kind of a serious publishing contract, they will want to get an agent. So that's the first and sometimes a tremendous feat, is to get that agent. So the numbers can be kind of discouraging because there are so many writers out there and not as many agents, and agents that are very selective about what they pick. So it's the landscape is bumpy, and there's no guarantee that you'll ever reach the finish line. Having said that, though, I don't trash the traditional route because there are authors for whom self-publishing is just not the right way to go. And what I mean by that is you have to have an entrepreneurial spirit when you self-publish. You have to be comfortable taking the lead on something and making decisions and ultimately promoting yourself, which is something that not all authors are comfortable doing. So there are authors, and I know of them, they will wait forever and they will just keep plugging away until they get that agent, and that's okay. So I don't criticize people who pick that route, but if you're someone who feels you don't want to wait around for that stamp of approval, not to mention that just because you get an agent, there is no guarantee that your book will actually get ever picked up. So it's a long road to getting traditionally published. So if that doesn't appeal to you, you like the idea of taking creative control of your book and promoting yourself and going through that journey, then self-publishing is definitely the way to go.
Awesome. And there seems to me that there are some players kind of in between. Maybe I'm not sure exactly what they are, but maybe they're small publishing houses that will take you on for a fee.
Yes.
And they will publish, they will do a little bit of marketing, but you then have to be the entrepreneur. There's
absolutely
self-publishing. They're part of the
right.
house. So can you explain?
Yeah, absolutely. Sure. Those are called hybrid publishers. Actually, there are a number of terms that can be used to describe them, but one of the most common ones is hybrid. And it's a hybrid essentially. So they're taking some parts, the good parts of a traditional model, but they're also taking some parts of the self-publishing model. So for authors who don't necessarily want to do it alone, or they still want the support of a traditional publishing house, hybrid publishers could be an option. It just, the waters get a little murky because sometimes it's a hybrid publisher, but ultimately they are kind of like an author services company in the sense that they charge you. they'll do the services, but then more often than not, you still are left to your own devices when it comes to marketing, because marketing is ultimately the biggest chunk that a lot of authors find overwhelming, and where available support is less. But what you're referring to is really a hybrid publishing model. So for women, there's a press called She Writes Press, and they very much embody that model of hybrid publishing. They have a set fee. They also accept a limited number of manuscripts. They're selective. They will not put their name on just anything. And I, for that matter, I actually kind of do the same thing. I mean, I sometimes do get manuscripts and I say, even though I'm not the publisher of this work is not ready to be put out to market. But hybrid publishers will typically practice that as well. They will vet the manuscripts that they decide to accept, even if they are being paid to publish them.
And one of the things that kind of discouraged me, because when I was looking at going through this decision-making process and came on your services, I was like what you were saying. I'm an entrepreneur. I was not waiting for someone else to tell me whether and when.
Yeah, whether you could publish. Yeah, exactly.
It took me, 9 years, as you know, on and off writing this
Absolutely.
book.
I wasn't throwing you under the bus. It's such a long journey sometimes to write a book. Yeah.
And then to wait 2, 3, 4 years for somebody to say I can publish. You just want to get it out there. But the other thing, I did look at hybrid publishers. I didn't know the term, and they can't come in so many varieties. And what I saw was, one, it was really hard to wade through them and know which ones were authentic and not. The other one is I had heard from a number of people who had experiences with some of the large and well-known ones. I won't name them here. You guys can contact me if you want to know more. That they charge a lot of money and don't necessarily get the value for what they're doing. And so I figured, well, why not get somebody who really could coach me through every step of the way. The other thing that was really important to me, and then you said this right from the beginning when we spoke, is that I own the book 100%. Because I don't know if the hybrid, or there's another word for them, that they own the book and you have to buy it from them.
Yes, absolutely. Or if you want to make any changes, like sometimes I have authors who contact me and they have been published by a hybrid publisher, but they're not enjoying the terms of the contract and they want to get out. And so I'll ask them, okay, well, do you have your files? It sounds funny, but do you have that formatted book file? Do you have your cover? And more often than not, they don't. And so then that forces them to go back and ask for them back. And normally when you're published by a traditional house, it makes sense that they own that, so to speak, because they are completely invested in your project. But if they're not, this is where sometimes that relationship can become questionable, and it's not always in the interests of the author. But yes, for me, this is something I always emphasize, is that it's your book. I don't dabble in royalties. We're just here to put the book together, and the book will always be yours. So if 2 years from now you want to change up the cover, we'll change up the cover, or you can even do it on your own. You don't have to come back to us. There isn't that long-term commitment that we impose on authors.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing too was for me, a deciding factor was the creative license. I really had a vision for my book and what I wanted it to look like, and feel like, and I had, so if I went to a traditional publisher or agent, and if I actually got accepted, the chances of that staying the way it was could change.
Oh, absolutely. Titles can be changed. I mean, we hear about it all the time, even in movies. Somebody has written a screenplay, they've given it a name, and then the agent goes, no, we're going to change it up, or we're going to change up a character. So they wouldn't necessarily intervene to that degree in your book because it is such a personal story. But it's highly likely they might have changed the title. They would have had their own. Very often authors get that first thing in the mail and they're like, oh, it's a fait accompli. This is my book. This is what it looks like, so you have complete creative control. And I guide authors so that we marry their vision with something that looks professional, that will print well. So that is where the guidance comes in that I feel is so valuable, because you just have to look at book covers out there, and there are some that should not be, that should simply not exist, and that's where I feel the intervention of a professional is so important, because you can do it yourself or you can find someone to do it, but they have to also know what they're doing.
Well, that was going to lead me to my next question, because that's what's really important. That while now we have the freedom and the creative license to publish on our own through self-publishing, what's happening is there's a lot of stuff out there that is not written well, not designed well, not marketed well, and so forth. And so you have this glut of self-publishing products out there that are just not at a very high standard. And it's kind of bringing down the perception of self-publishing for the world.
Yes,
you know?
Absolutely. And there's no doubt about it. The stigma of self-publishing still exists. And you see that definitely in more traditional circles. So for instance, I'm a member of the Writers Union of Canada. They just decided to start they've been accepting self-publishers now. I think it's been about 2 years now, but they had to go through this whole thing at their General Assembly. They had to get a vote. And it wasn't by an overwhelming majority that they decided to start accepting self-published authors. And there is very much a stigma that, self-published, it just doesn't mean good. And in some cases, that's still very much the fact.
Because they didn't have to go through that gatekeeper, the
precisely
publisher, whatever, that said
exactly.
No, right? So
exactly.
So that's, I think, a cautionary tale for all of us to when we're thinking about publishing, is that if we want to do it ourselves, we have to have it at the highest quality. The writing, the design, the layout, and that was really important to me as well.
Absolutely, and that's sometimes the reason I cite sometimes the hype around the book in 30 days is there are many proponents out there of just churning out books. And there is something to that, especially if you're a nonfiction author, or even fiction for that matter. The saying always is you start out with your first, but then you get your second. And with your second book, you'll get readers to go to your first. So it makes sense. The model makes sense. But the rush to churn out those books, it just leaves to question, what is the quality if you're just churning out 2, 3, 4 books a year? So they might all be great, but more often than not, they aren't. And so what are you putting those out for?
Yeah.
So it's important that they mean something and they stand for something.
Well, that's it. And what do you find for most of the people you work with? I'm sure it varies, but what are some of the reasons that people want to write a book? For a lot of readers, for a lot of writers, I find there's this intangible, I just want to share my story. I feel that my story is important. This is particularly true for nonfiction. So I talk to writers every week, and some of them have written deeply personal stories. Others have written stories surrounding advice and guidance that help them in their lives, and they'd like to impart that to readers. And some people just believe in a story. If they're writing fiction, I have an author that I work with. He's written a whole trilogy. Now he's writing a couple of other books. He loves the characters and he loves the stories that he's giving these characters. So there has to be a belief in what you're writing. There has to be a belief, because if there isn't a belief, you're going to give up. Because I always tell authors it's not easy, and publishing is just the first step, because I do occasionally meet authors who just have these enormous high expectations that their book is just going to be released and it'll be embraced by influencers and readers alike. And it doesn't work that way, because what you just said about the number of books being published every month on Amazon is it's crazy, the numbers. So you need to stand out, and it takes a lot of perseverance to stand out. Yeah. And then other people, I guess, also have some objective where they want it to be more of a calling card for their business. And
absolutely,
the sales themselves on Amazon is not the most important. It's more that they get it in the hands.
Absolutely. Especially if there are authors who want to develop speaking careers, they want to get out on stage more. There's always the powerful back of room sales, as we call it, so people listen to you and then they go to the back of the room and they buy your book. So there's definitely a growing demand for business people, coaches, people in the wellness professions, people who just want to get out and speak more. They definitely use a book. It's a business accessory. It underlines their authority. It underlines their expertise. Absolutely. And many authors are very successful with that model.
Mm-hmm. Now, one of the things, if I could just add, for me, my experience was a little bit different in that, it's my personal story. I guess it relates a little bit to my professional story too, because it's about me kind of awakening to a greater version of myself, and then discovering, to some extent, my life purpose. But what I found really interesting for myself was to watch myself through the process, because first of all, that I kept thinking it was not related to my business at all. So I had a hard time sitting down and investing the time in writing it, though I felt, like you said at the beginning, I really felt called to share this message with other people who are suffering and help them. But I could never really give it the time for a long time, because I didn't see how it would affect my business. They were two parallel paths. And then when I finally got to just about to launch, it finally occurred to me that my business over 9 years finally caught up with my message.
Caught up the book. Yeah.
So
yes, absolutely.
How bizarre was that?
Yes. No, but I find for a lot of authors that works. I have a client who wrote a children's book, and she too was struggling with the same thing. She does a lot of wellness consultation and a wellness coach. And then she wrote this children's book. And we looked for the themes, but they were there. It was all about family and all about enjoying the moments. And so that's where I guess author branding comes in, right? And figuring out ultimately what you write is an extension of who you are. And ideally your business is an extension of who you are. So while it might not be obvious, there usually is a point of connection between those.
Yes, and the other thing is from a creative perspective, is just to allow that. And any coach that I had in writing, like, Julie and others have said to me, or things I've read, which was so hard for me, is just go with the creative process. Just keep writing. You don't know what the story's about to your last words. I did workshops. And it was so true for me. It was the hardest thing for me to do. But now in looking back, is that the writing of the book taught me how to be more in that space. And because I'm very much from the business world and everything, but writing the book and having to allow and let go and surrender and to the creative process and not knowing where it's going to go, it's that just seeing that and seeing it completed and seeing the rewards of it was like, I can do that. I can do it again, maybe too,
It's so interesting you mentioned that, because that sort of lends itself to, when should authors start thinking about self-publishing, and when should they start gathering all that information? I was just talking to an author yesterday, and she had just finished her first draft, but she already wanted to get an idea of what are my next steps. And I said, you know what? You've just written your first draft. I'm sure you know, Leanne, too, right? That it doesn't end at the first draft. And I said, you know what? There's nothing wrong with gathering basic info, but don't let that derail you. Really stick to your course and just try to make that book the best it can be. There's nothing wrong with remaining open to nuggets of information and starting to learn, but really just work on making that book the best. So that's also a little bit of a surrender, because some people are very result oriented. I need to know I'm going to finish this book on this date, and 6 weeks later I'm going to have a cover, and they want that timeline. And there's nothing wrong with that. You definitely want a timeline, but there's something about just letting go of that part and just writing that book, which sometimes goes against the grain of a lot of advice that is out there, which is, no, before you even write the first word, you have to think about your author brand, your audience, how you're going to market the book. And I don't actually totally agree with that. I just don't, because I feel, I guess because I'm a writer first, I think it's important to just let go for a little bit of all that publishing, strategizing stuff, and just focus on the book.
I agree 100%. And it was the hardest thing for me. So if we talk about kind of the yin and yang, the male, the female energy, which is in all of us, the business side, so Julie told me at one point, there's two types of writers. There's the architect who have everything structured and everything. And then there's more the painter or the sculptor. And they're putting things on and taking them off. The gardener. And so I'm very much the architect, and I'm like, I have to know. And so it was such a job for me to surrender to the process. I learned that I was the same way with the first draft years ago. And it was so humbling to realize that I had to work on most of the chapters I had to rework 4, 5, 6 times.
Absolutely.
Edits and stuff like that. And then I many times I wanted to give up, because it was like, it's so hard, right? But
it is hard.
Trying to be more like the gardener or the sculptor or the painter, working at pieces at a time, one chapter at a time, one scene at a time, and
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
And letting go of, okay, this is going to get me X number of clients or whatever that is. And
Right.
the result
Right.
of the book was much better than had I done it the other way.
Yes, I totally agree.
Yeah, so it's really neat. So maybe if you could explain to people watching some of the big steps, the major kind of steps in this process.
Sure. So once you have that manuscript and you feel it's at a point where, you know, you've done those 3, 4, 5 revisions, the first step that I always recommend is an edit. And that really is an edit to, in most cases, because there's also substantive editing, but substantive editing really comes into play in the earlier draft, where you just want to get a feel, is this manuscript going somewhere? Is it clear? Is it easy to follow? Are there some parts where I just kind of lose people? And so that tends to happen in the earlier stages. But if someone comes to me and no, I've been working on this for 2-3 years or whatever, I feel good about it, the first thing we do is a copy edit. So we want to make sure that there are no typos, grammatical errors, things like citations are properly presented, awkward phrasing. Sometimes authors, without realizing it, will repeat the same word 5 times in a paragraph. We all have our writing styles and our little weaknesses, so we tweak all of that. You also have a cover design, which is a huge element. So really designing, getting a book cover. So what we do is we typically start with a survey with our authors, get a feel for what are their preferences. We all have preferences. In your case, you had a specific vision. Some authors don't come with that vision, but we are guided nonetheless by their tastes, by other book covers they like. And so you want to have a cover design that will be gripping to potential readers, but also speaks true to you and to who you are as an author and what your story is all about. We also have
Sorry, can I interrupt you? Because I want to go through each one of these ones. If we go back to just the editing for a second, I think it's really worth noting that a lot of times people think there's an edit and it's one edit, or you give it to someone and they edit it for you.
Right.
And that's I saw that there was at least 2, if not 3, if not 4. Let's say 2 or 3. Where when you talk about the substantive, yeah, that can be, for me, was a lot of rewriting. You know, that was where
absolutely
the chapter said, well, you're missing this piece, you need to add more here. So there was a real rewrite. Then there was, after a few of those, then there was really editing to say, is this the best way to say everything? You know, and then there was the copy line by line.
Yes, exactly.
Or whatever. Yeah.
Right. So some authors come to me and they've already done that substantive editing, and they've also done beta readers. I actually recommend that authors get some beta readers. These are trusted people. This does not mean you're hiring your mother who's always going to love everything you do. You need to have people who want you to succeed, but they're going to give the tough love necessary to make that book the best it can possibly be. So beta readers are always great. But yes, the copy editing is really that last line by line of just making sure there are no wrong apostrophes and all of that. So that is the finishing touch. That is by no means the only edit that your book should experience or undergo. You need to have multiple rounds of that.
And if I just add to the beta readers too, is that what I also had 2 kind of beta readers, in that I was part of a writer's circle that throughout my process, I had beta readers giving me honest feedback all the time. And then once I had the really substantial draft done and it was in really good shape, as best that I could do it, then I gave it to 10 people who were just like you described, you know, and they gave me feedback. And what was really interesting to me, as much as I thought I'd edited everything and even worked with an editor, they still found a lot of things that were off. And of those 10 people, very few saw the same thing. It was like all different things. It was amazing.
Well, that's sometimes the task of the author too, because sometimes you don't have to necessarily accept everyone's feedback, but to go back to how your beta readers still found issues. Sometimes even if you're working with a writing coach, my experience is the writing coach is often just as immersed, though from a different perspective, but they are just as immersed in your work as you are. And they probably are not the right person to give that final read. At some point it should be passed on.
Yeah, exactly. So then you talked about the cover design, and then the next thing I think you were about to talk about was, the internal design, I think, right?
The interior layout,
Some
exactly.
people
So
don't understand that at all, and how important that is amazing.
yes, that really is. So for instance, you know, there are do-it-yourself programs where you get your Word document and they'll churn out something that is a book layout. I'm not necessarily saying that all of the results from that are poor, but typography, for instance, is something that's important. So do you want to have Times New Roman or Arial as your interior fonts? I would scream absolutely not. But the world of typography is in itself so involved, because maybe not every font is appropriate for the type of book. I know, for instance, with Leanne, when we were looking at those chapter headings, you know, we wanted something that spoke to the theme of love and that softness and inspiration and whatever, whereas a book on sales will not have that kind of a font. But you want to make sure that the book looks professionally done. So typography is a major element of that, so that your book is really, you know, speaking to the whole art, the work of art theme. Yeah, typography plays a huge role. So, and also just making sure it's properly laid out. You know, having a drop cap for the beginning of your chapters is a nice professional touch. What is your running header, you know, your chapter titles and your author name. And while some of these things are flexible, you ultimately still want them to look professional and pretty.
Yeah, and you want to follow the best practices. You know, it will just say, like, you know, the way that this, you know, showed up. My what do you call that page? The
title page.
The title page, and just how that lays out, and each one, the copyright page.
Yeah, the copyright info. Yes.
Yeah, it's one of these steps. You know, like what. How, you know, in doing the index,
the table of contents. Yeah, absolutely. The way we put in your advanced acclaim, Leanne, that was something else. So that too, where would you put it? Well, you really should put it at the front, at the very front. But yes, these are things that are important to know. And then, of course, from there, we also have ebook conversion. So this is something else that there are, again, programs out there. But what's tricky with ebook conversion is if your book has any particular features, like a bullet point or an illustration, that has to be ideally coded in so that no matter the reading device, those elements will appear properly. Because that's the thing with electronic reading devices, is there are so many. The screen can be expanded, the screen can be made smaller. How do you ensure that no matter what parameters the reader has control over, how can you be assured that your book will still read and look properly? And that's where proper ebook conversion has to take place. And it's seriously, it's like coding your book. There's no other way to describe it.
Yeah, for sure. And that's where I started to lose it, when I started thinking about doing it.
Yeah, no, it's very technical. It's the ebook conversion. I mean, I've seen, like, my designers has, you know, shown me the back end of that, and I'm just thinking, okay, that's really crazy.
Yeah, and so and your designer that we worked with, well, you had two designers. You had the cover designer, who also the interior designer, who did a phenomenal job. It's a great team. The thing that I got also a little bit like, ooh, how am I going to do this? Is all getting on Amazon. Like, this big mysterious.
Yes.
Can you explain a couple
of
involved in that?
Absolutely. So one of the first things I should mention is it's important to get an ISBN. So an ISBN is a unique number identifier. It identifies your book. Exactly. It identifies your book in the retail channels of the world. So no matter what, that number will forever be attributed to your book, Leanne. So it's important you get an ISBN. Amazon will tell you that you don't need an ISBN. You can just get a free one assigned by them. I always recommend authors get their own, even though in the States it will cost something. American authors do have to purchase their ISBNs, but it's worth it because it is yours. And if you use an Amazon assigned ISBN, they become the publisher. And if you want to get out to bookstores and they start seeing that Amazon is your publisher, speaking, you know, addressing once again the stigma, well, that reinforces the stigma. And I always recommend get your own ISBN, get a barcode for the back cover. And then it's all about utilizing the different online publishing platforms to make your book available to online retailers such as Amazon. So Amazon has its own platform called KDP. It stands for Kindle Direct Publishing, and it's completely free. You open up your account, and then from there, they handhold you through the process of uploading all the necessary metadata, uploading your cover file, your interior file. You can state the price, you put in a description, you can select your categories, and you have control over all of this. And then your book is published and is available on Amazon and all the Amazon markets. So Amazon.ca, Amazon UK, etc., etc. So that's
interject there because I'm on some self-publishing Facebook groups or whatever, and it was interesting for me to watch so many people complaining, asking questions, and saying, you know, I've tried to upload my file, it's not working, and I was like, I don't have to worry about any of that stuff.
Exactly. No, but that is totally it, and that is one of the differences. So when people ask me, well, I can just do this all myself, I'm always very honest, and absolutely you can do it all yourself. I don't pretend to have any secret powers or any secret connections to the publishing world. I just have the experience, and I have the team that saves authors the headaches of uploading the file only to get an error response and not knowing what to do with that. How do I resolve that problem? So yes, there are a lot of hiccups that can happen along the way. You can figure them out on your own. And there are authors, I've spoken to authors who say, you know what, Alexa, I think I'm just going to do it alone. And that is perfectly valid. Mm-hmm. If you're not as interested in going through some of the learning curves, then that's where Aaxel Author Services or other companies can come in handy.
But you're rated highest, so there you go. We have to stick with you. So let me ask you a couple of other questions that people ask me a lot. So I also printed my book. I got a print run from a local printer so that I could do a book launch, and I could have local people, and I can sign it and that kind of thing. So I think you recommend most people have at least a print run of their thing, right? Absolutely. Depending on, you know, some authors are already ready to do book signings. Some authors just want to have a few copies on hand for family and friends, and that's perfectly valid. But you can get your copies printed from Amazon. Like KDP will do print runs if you use Ingram Spark as an alternate publishing platform, which is what I always recommend authors use because it makes their books available to other online retailers. They will also print books for you. But for instance, if you're in Canada and you're receiving 200 books shipped from the States, it can really become costly. There can be the whole customs issue as well. So I work with a couple of local book printers, and that's important. It's important to emphasize book printers because I've been to other printers and they'll say, yeah, look, we printed this book and it just doesn't look good. It really doesn't look good. So it's important that you work with a printer who can print books. Yes, and somebody asked me recently today about recommending the local printer, which I love. And, you know, he also caught things that we didn't catch, and when it was being printed and made the change, was just like on its own. So
exactly.
Professional in that area wouldn't have been able to do that, right?
No, they would not have been able to. And I just had a client just 2 weeks ago saying, I just asked this printer for their book template for the cover, and they just looked at me like they didn't know what I was talking about. But anybody who prints books will understand the whole template cover file thing because they have one if they're printing book covers, and if they don't normally print book covers, they won't know what you're talking about.
Well, and that's one of the things that you and your designers help me and the printer a lot. Like with this, for example, you know, the spine has to be exactly designed perfectly so that the paper that it fits. You think, oh, that seems really easy, but it has to be based on the paper and the number of pages. And how the heck I've ever figured that out? I don't know.
There are many factors because you want the spine to look good. So you don't want it to be an afterthought, and then you're going to have issues where like the cover design is folding into the spine, things like that, or the cover is not, it doesn't cover enough. So yes, those are all technical aspects that are really important.
Yeah, exactly. So one of the things I wanted to go back to is you mentioned Ingram Sparks, because I think that's a really interesting thing too. So my understanding, and if you correct me if I'm wrong, the way that I look at Ingram Sparks is it's like the wholesaler for retail bookstores. And so by having your book loaded up on there, which you helped me with, then it allows me to be able to get book retailers in North America and in England. I don't know beyond.
They have a couple in Australia as well. Yes, so Ingram Ingram is like, they are a huge player in the book world in general. With book distribution and book printing, they are huge. And so Ingram Spark is their little offshoot that really caters to independent authors. It gives them a platform through which they can make the book available to retailers. So for instance, if you're doing an event at Indigo, if you publish your book on Ingram Spark, they will be able to order books directly from Ingram. And that's how that works. And yes, that's a good way to describe it. It really is a bit like your wholesaler warehouse, except it's all print on demand. So you don't actually, so Ingram will only print 20 copies when an Indigo store in Toronto has ordered them. So it's a little bit it's a little bit between the two. I do want to mention in all fairness that KDP, Amazon, also offers extended distribution, but their chunk of the pie, so to speak, is greater. So maybe at the beginning, a couple of extra dollars doesn't make a difference. But if your book starts taking off and you can keep more of that money, it can start adding up.
Yeah, and I think that was part of the surprise for me, is how much they keep too.
Yes. Yeah. Well, yes. And to be fair, print on demand, your unit cost will be greater than if you just do a print run. But the advantage is that you don't have to much, the way independent authors had to do 20 years ago. You just do this print run of thousands of copies and they're just sitting in your house languishing. So
exactly. And so print on demand for Amazon, how does it work? They actually, if you order, they print that one copy?
That is correct. So if you have a friend out in Vancouver and they order a book, Amazon has several printers that they work with. So it's not all in one warehouse, let's say, but they will print a copy and they will ship it out. So that's something else that some authors are pleasantly surprised to hear, is that Amazon does do it all for you, which is amazing. So you're not shipping copies directly. Amazon doesn't send you emails saying, okay, now you've got these 2 orders. They do it all for you. So that's very much how it works. I should mention that if they start seeing that a book is moving and it's being ordered often, they will print out a few copies just to save themselves the problem of always printing out one. But in general, the model is print on demand, yes.
Okay, that's what I was wondering, because sometimes with Amazon Prime, you can get the book the next day. I'm wondering how they do that in one copy at a time. There must be ones that are more popular.
Yes, yeah, exactly. I'm not exactly sure how they pull that off. I don't know actually how Amazon pulls off much of what they do, but yes, but it's still a print on demand model. Yes, it is.
They're very futuristic. It's amazing.
Yes.
So we've gone through everything. The other thing was pricing too.
Yes.
You guided me a lot about pricing and different information. Something that was, again, interesting for me, because the Amazon platform is really the American platform, even though here we are in Canada, that you have to price your book in the United States, and it fluctuates on Amazon.ca based on exchange rates. So I don't have a set price on Amazon.ca, right? So this is kind of
no, you don't. So what they do is they'll take these. So in some ways, Amazon regards their .com and their .ca markets as one. So when it comes to pricing, you don't really have any control over your Canadian price. However, authors can always go in and change pricing. And that's something that's really flexible. So if suddenly, I don't know, if you feel that people are not buying your book because maybe it's priced a little high, you can just go in and you can lower the price. And it's really that simple. So authors can go in and change, after they've published the book, they can go in and change everything except title, ISBN. These you cannot change, because once you've put in an ISBN in the book world, that ISBN is associated with that title. You want to change the title, you have to get a new ISBN.
Wow. Okay. So that's good to know. And we're, we've got just a few more minutes. So I wanted to just talk about what do people then, once they got it on Amazon, we're printing, normally it's a book launch, and then what else? Tell us a little bit why you'd want a book launch, and then what else is kind of involved, because it's a long-term process, as you mentioned up front.
Oh, it's very much a long-term process. So I say a book launch is always a good idea. Some authors come to me and they don't really have an established network. They're just launching their business at the same time in parallel to the book. So, but I always say it's a celebration. It's something that should be celebrated and underlined with some kind of an event. But afterwards, it's all about how do you extend beyond the F&F network, as I call it, the family and friends, or the friends and family network. And this is where a lot of active marketing comes in. And it really depends on your book. So there are some books, I'm working with an author who's hired a PR agent because she's writing books that are very much of interest to the media. but that takes a lot of work. So she's put together a press kit, she's working, she's trying to get guest blog posts and interview spots and whatnot. That's not necessarily going to be the first choice for a fiction author. It tends to be harder to get coverage, if you will, from a work of fiction, unless you can tie it in with a timely theme. So that is always possible.
And if
Definitely,
that's what I'm doing as well right now, working with someone that you recommend. That's also the benefit. You've recommended some wonderful people. So
yeah,
working on that, and again, is a long-term process. It's not like it has to be all at the book launch. It's like,
oh, no, absolutely. It's a long-term process. Some authors like to go for book reviews. So I have a fiction author, he's going for some book reviews, and that can be helpful to get some nice reviews of your book, particularly with fiction. Goodreads is an interesting platform for many authors. Just think of it as Facebook for bookworms. People go on, they register as readers, they put books on their virtual bookshelf. As an author, you can interact with readers, you can host Q&As, you can do Goodreads giveaways, which is really wonderful. It's essentially a contest that you open up, you decide the number of copies you want to give away, and Goodreads will promote your book as a contest, and they will plug it, and then you have people entering the contest, and all of those people, even the ones who don't win, they then know about your book. So that can be helpful. Social media interaction is important, though sometimes the advice is, well, you got to be everywhere. So you have to open up your Instagram, but that's not necessarily true. So for instance, if your book is primarily geared to the business community, I don't know if Instagram is going to be so much worth your time. LinkedIn can be much more powerful. If you've written a health and wellness book geared towards women 25 to 35, Instagram could be really, really interesting. So it's so important to guide authors, or as an author yourself, to really think about, where is my market and where can I best spend my time?
Right, exactly. And that the whole Goodreads, what you were talking about, is something that I'm just starting to work with you. So I'm looking forward to kind of seeing
exactly.
how
So you'll be able to give an update. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. And then book tours as well, right? Is going into bookstores. And, and that, what would be the main purpose to do that, would you say?
The main purpose so sometimes authors will say, okay, I'm setting up a book event. Should I create a Facebook event? Should I start promoting it? To be really honest, if no one knows about you or your book, I'd always tell authors, don't invest too much expectation in getting people into the bookstore. The point is to maximize the people who are already there. Draw them to your booth, create something interesting that will appeal to people. And even if they don't pick up your book, but they pick up some kind of promotional material and they go home with it, your book has traveled, so to speak. Your book has still traveled with them nonetheless. And more people know about your book. And it's really not as difficult as some authors might think to get into a Chapters or an Indigo. Bookstores are relatively really open to hosting author events. They like events. They do like to see authors taking the initiative to bring people in as well. But it's not as difficult as people think. It's really not. Sometimes it takes a bit of pursuing because store managers are busy. Being professional, having a professional product is super important. And what's most important is what you do with that time there. Because I remember a store manager telling me, I've seen New York Times bestselling authors come here and they just sit. They have their little table and they just sit, and they don't really attract all that many people, unless of course you're a super hot author, obviously. And I've seen some independent authors, she told me, come in and just crush it. They just have tons of people engage and interact with them. And it really is all about what you do with those 2-3 hours that the store gives you.
That's awesome. And then also that what you can do on social media with that too, telling people you're at Chapters and that kind of thing, that obviously gives your followers a sense of credibility that you're actually in a retail store as well, right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And then you can do consignment deals with stores. They'll very often take a few copies on consignment. And if those move, they will start ordering your books. And that's a very nice feeling of validation. So yes.
Wow, very cool. So my last question I have for you is really about the Alliance of Independent Authors. And what is that and how are you involved with that?
Sure. So the Alliance of Independent Authors is an organization that started in the UK by a woman called Orna Ross. And it's all about, it's a huge organization of independent authors at all stages of the process. Some of them are still writing their books. Some of them are ready to publish, and many of them have published. And it's a resource. It's a platform rich with resources for authors. There are forums where they can learn from the experiences of other authors. I'm a partner member, so what that means is there's a process that is involved in becoming a partner member. So you have to basically be approved. So there's an application process, then you have to answer a bunch of questions, then they do some research on you, they look at your presence online, they look at the services, they look at your pricing, because you had mentioned earlier, sometimes pricing is, it can exploit authors, to be really honest. So they want to make sure pricing is fair, reflective of the services being offered. And as a partner member, I have a chance to be visible among these members and interact with them. And yes,
and you get,
so
and,
that's
they,
what the
and other authors give feedback too, I think it sounds like. And
yes, absolutely. And authors can rate services that they have used. So that's also really empowering, because sometimes as an author, do I take a chance on this person? Are they going to just run with my money? Is the product going to be any good? So that's really important, because it's scary to publish your book. It can be a very overwhelming process. And for many of them, the investment is significant. This is not just a couple of $100, and you want to feel like your money's going somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. And it is a significant, it's in the thousands of dollars, I can say. And
yes,
and you want to make sure, and even if they'll say, and they advertise, it's only this, you have to add on and add on and add on, and it becomes quite
so important that I have authors, will frequently say, well, I just talked to this company and they offer this, and a lot of lingo can sometimes be used. And if you don't really, like a perfect example is distribution. Oh, your book will be distributed to thousands of retailers. That's not the same as saying all these retailers are going to put your book in their stores.
Yeah.
It just, your book is available, but it's it remains one of the least understood things is they read that and they think the book will be in stores. And it's not the same thing, but it all depends on how you phrase it, right? You can phrase it in a way where authors think, this is amazing.
Well, and that's analogous to, I remember when I used to start way back when, help people with websites back in the early 2000s. They figured that once they had the website up, everyone would come and find them.
Yeah.
And it's, you can't, it's the same thing. You have your book through Ingram Sparks, but there has to be some mechanism that's driving.
There has to be some mechanism and a lot of effort on your part to actually get retailers to order your book, but it's available. And that is a wonderful advantage to authors. It's great, but this is where it becomes really important when you evaluate or assess the services being offered, that you really understand what you're getting.
That's great. And so is this alliance good for just authors like myself to go and
absolutely. Absolutely. If you go on their website, they have resources for everyone. They've got a podcast, they have a magazine. You can find resources for whatever step of the process. And they have a member directory. You have to be a member to get it, but that directory really lists all the different partner members and the services they offer. So if you're looking for a ghostwriter, you can find, but you need to be a member to join that and to have access to that. But there are other things that you can just listen to for free, like the podcast and whatnot.
That's great. Now, is there anything else that you would want to, that I haven't asked you, that you'd like to mention?
I think we've spoken about the publishing process. I would just say that one thing I do want to mention is a lot of people, there's this people feel compelled to publish a book. It's one of these things now in the business world, it's a given, publish a book. And I really believe that, if you don't want to publish a book right now, then that's okay. And if you never want to publish a book, that's okay too. I'm not one of these people who pushes people to publish a book. And there are books for different purposes. And sometimes you don't even want to publish a book. So if you want to do it well. And even if you want to go at it alone, still you should get some suppliers on your side. You can find them, but you want to make sure they're going to do a good job. So you can do it by yourself, but just do it well. That's really important. At least for me, it's important because there is a slush pile out there and you don't want to be in the slush pile.
Very good advice. Thank you for all that the information. And people can contact you at your website or phone.
Yes,
what's the best way?
Absolutely. Yeah, AaxelAuthorServices.com. And you can also just email me directly, which is Alexa at AaxelAuthorServices.com. So those would really be the best way.
AAXEL, authorservices.com. Well, I'll put a link. This will be on YouTube.
Yes,
so
that might be useful. Yes, exactly. It can be a mouthful, but yeah, it probably would be useful.
No, it's great. And because we're out of time right now, for anyone who's on here, if they want to just wait till we stop the recording and ask any questions directly to Alexa, they can as well. But I just want to thank you so much. Really appreciate you taking the time. And I think this is going to be super valuable for information for people who are just starting to think about it. They may be 6 months, 2 years out, but it's given a lot. It's really demystifying the whole publishing process. And I could just remind people, if they were interested in this book that was shepherded by this wonderful lady, Love Will Keep Us Alive, loveWillKeepUsAlive.com, and you can find out information. You can order or contact me directly for a signed copy. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Leanne. Thank you so much.
Awesome.